All right, I think we are live. Welcome to Marketing Live. Marketing Live is part of a Higher Ed Live network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts, which are always free and accessible to you in the archives of higheredlive.com. Be a part of our broadcast by tuning in live and sharing your insights and questions using hashtag HigherEdLive on Twitter. You can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. Today's show would not be possible without the support of M. Stoner and FormStack. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Two never before released chapters from M. Stoner's books Social Works and Follow the Leader are now available for download as audio chapters. We're tweeting out a link where you can download these chapters for free and learn more about M. Stoner's helpful resources. FormStack is an online form builder solution and your go-to tool for higher ed web conversions. FormStack makes it easy for marketers to create branded, mobile-ready web forms without writing code. Build donation forms, application forms, event registrations, and more with the web's only Section 508 compliant form builder. Interact with your audience on social media using FormStack's Facebook tab or social media autofill features. For even more conversions, use FormStack's robust analytics data to refine your form. FormStack also partners with popular marketing applications so you can nurture your leads more effectively. Visit formstack.com to learn more about the ways FormStack can double your response rates and increase your conversions today. So let's jump into our topic for today. Website redesigns don't work if your content is a mess. Today, I'm very excited that we are going to be having an expert and new author of the Content Strategy Toolkit, Megan Casey, on how to develop your content strategy and the process to carry it out. So welcome, Megan. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here and hoping to see some of the people on the line at Confab Higher Ed in November.
Great. So Megan is the lead content strategist at Brain Traffic, and she also has degrees from Concordia College and Hamline University. So very smart lady. And again, any of our viewers can tweet questions anytime during the show using hashtag HigherEdLive. So to start off our discussion, I absolutely love your book and recommend that everyone goes out and gets a copy on Amazon. It went straight to my Kindle real fast, and there's some really cool tools in there. So to start off, I love your definition. Content strategy helps organizations provide the right content to the right people at the right times for the right reasons. Can you elaborate more on why content is so important and how wide should our content strategy go? So should it include websites and social media and printed documents and all that kind of good stuff?
Sure. Well, I like talking about content strategy. So yes, I can talk about those things. The way that I am evolving to see it and, have for some time, but I'm kind of figuring out how to put into words is that content is really the lifeblood of the customer experience. It affects in some way pretty much every touch point that an organization has with their customer. For higher ed, that customer might be
I think
a staff person, a faculty member, an alumnus, a donor. You get the idea. So even in-person interactions.
Megan, I think we went out for a second. So I think the last thing we heard, you were talking about the different audiences and how it's the lifeblood. Megan, you still there? Hello? Seems as though we're having some technical difficulties that we're going to try to get back together. Megan's attending an excellent conference and talking about content strategy and things like that. And I think the connection might have gone out for a second. Are you still there?
I'm here.
Okay, fabulous. Sorry about that. I think we got out for a second.
Okay, great. Well, sorry about that. Here I was just off and running. Okay, so I think you heard me say that I believe content is the lifeblood of the customer experience, and wanted to make sure that I called out that for higher ed, customers are an interesting group of people. You've got students, you've got parents, you've got staff, you have faculty, you have alumnus, you have donors, you have community members. So your customers are a lot of people. And even the in-person interactions that you have stem from content in some way about how you're positioning yourself, how you answer questions about the university or the college. So lots going on with content there. So related to sort of how far should it go, I think ultimately it really should start at the institution level and roll out through the organization and those various touch points. So it should answer from the perspective of the complete customer experience and the smaller touch points that make up your content ecosystem, like your website, your social media, all of those things. Who do we need to talk to? What do those people care about? Where do they interact with us, our content, or even content about us that we don't control? What do we want to tell them related to the things they care about? So not just things we want to say, but like, what do they really want to know? And then what technology, roles, skill sets do we need to enable us to tell people what we want to tell them, when we want to tell them, when they want to know it, all of those things. And then finally, the policies, standards, guidelines that inform and guide everything we do. Yeah, so I guess I would just say, end with, it's big, it's complex, it's hard, and it really informs more than just the content we create, but it informs how we behave.
I love that. And so because it is so big and scary and it kind of touches everything, what are some of the reasons and why we'd want to update some of our information or review it?
Sure. So I think, there's a few reasons. One might be that we're realizing what we're providing, and this happens a lot. You've all seen that Venn diagram of like what the user wants to know and what the education wants to tell them. And in the middle is like the contact information or the location. I'm sure you've all seen that. That's one of the main reasons, is you might realize that you're trying to put out a bunch of information that nobody really cares about but you. And I think that's a really difficult thing for people to stop themselves from doing and say, we are not the center of our customers' universe or our audience's universe. So we need to think about what they want and need, a little bit less about what we want and need. Another reason might be that, maybe it's just not reflecting the way that we want to communicate with people. Maybe we haven't quite got our voice and tone right for the audiences we're speaking to. A huge one is that we want to make sure people can find our content. So we want to relook at our content to make sure it contains the words and phrases people would be searching for if they weren't just coming directly to our site. Another reason is maybe it's not very actionable. Maybe, we have all this great information about our, programs and offerings and degree programs and all of those things, but we don't have a call to action that says, talk to a faculty member if you want to learn more, or, whatever that might be. And then a really common reason is just that it's wrong. It's outdated. It doesn't make sense anymore. It's just plain old wrong. So those are good reasons, all good reasons to look at your content.
Well, and I love what you said about putting out there what the customer is looking for, not necessarily what we want them to be looking for. So I worked in housing for a while, and we call them residence halls, and we want everyone to call them residence halls. But let's be honest, students are searching for dorms.
Right, exactly.
You have to have that somewhere in there of call them a dormitory or something, but you can't always call it a residence hall because students don't know that word, perhaps.
Right, and I think another thing that happens on college websites quite a lot is a lot of slideshows for events that happened 5 years ago. Ain't nobody care. Nobody cares.
Exactly.
We care still maybe, but nobody else does.
It is very true. So because there are so many reasons and why we're going to want to update it, how can we demonstrate the value of the content and why it is so important? And in order to kind of generate leadership buy-in, because that's the hardest thing, is it takes a ton of time and resources. How do we show them like this is really important and this is why it should be our first priority?
Sure. So the main way that we can do that, and there actually is a tool in the book that addresses kind of like putting together your case for leadership. And it might be slightly different for higher ed, but what it really comes down to, sadly, is money and ROI, and being able to think like a business person and say, try to quantify, and it might not be exact quantification, but things like, we have a goal of a 10% increase in applications from, good candidates to the college. And we're having a hard time meeting that goal because we don't have the information that they're looking for on our website. So we are actually losing revenue from these people who would pay tuition because of our website content. So if you can tie what's wrong with your content to, business outcomes, I think that's the best way to do that. An example I give in the book is about a call center, and that if the company could decrease the number of time or the amount of times people call the call center for information that people should be able to find on the website, they're saving like millions of dollars. And it might not always be millions of dollars, but so if you can really quantify and tie it to business outcomes, that's how you're going to get the leaders to pony up, for lack of a better word.
No, I think that's a really good point. And thinking about higher ed with business outcomes, because I think a lot of folks think, oh, I'm in the housing department, there aren't any business outcomes. Well, are all of your rooms filled? Or I'm in dining, and are all of your meal plans taken care of? Like, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us in higher ed. That's some awesome points.
Yep, and we don't like to think about higher ed as a business, but it is. At the end of the day, it is.
Most certainly. So the scariest part, I have to admit, because I've done 3 website redos now in my professional career, and it's the scariest part is the content strategy is establishing a baseline through content assessments. So trying to figure out, what are all the things that we have and how good is it and all that kind of good stuff. So fortunately, one of the best features of your book is you have these icons that I love that say, here's where you can find additional resources. Here's, kind of tips of the trade to be able to do things more quickly, more efficiently, cheaper. So what are some of the tools that you recommend for correctly and efficiently evaluating our content?
Sure. There's kind of a 3-part process, I think, that goes with evaluating your content. First, it just starts with, and so maybe it's even 4 points. First, it just starts with figuring out what do we have, what exists out there. And to do that, you can sometimes run a kind of a spider tool that can just kind of, if you're looking at your website specifically, like what pages do we have? And that can be a really great start to then go in and start to do some assessment of the existing content. So things like, does it represent our voice and tone? Is it targeted for the right audience? Do we even know what audience it should be for? A lot of those different things that you can do with a spreadsheet. You can just have a spreadsheet of all the pages you want to take a look at, and there is an example of that spreadsheet in the book. So with some sort of tips and things for how to use it. The other piece is to look at your analytics as you're looking at those pages. How many views do they get? How long do people stay on the page? And that metric is good or bad depending on what kind of content it is. If it's a contact us page, you don't really want people to stay there very long because hopefully they found the information. If it's a page about a degree program, you might want people to stay there a little longer. If they left right away, it means perhaps they weren't interested. And then the other thing, so sort of this third leg of the stool, is really to get perspectives from people who you're trying to reach with your content. And there's a really cool, super easy user test that I have fallen in love with. Pete Gale, who worked on the gov.uk content, is the first person I saw who actually talked about this test. I'm not exactly sure if he invented it, but really it's just you print out a piece of your content that you want people to react to. You find the people who you want to reach with that content, and you just ask them, you give them a red highlighter or a pink highlighter and a yellow highlighter, and you ask them to rate the content basically as they're reading through it. How confident did this make you feel? That might be the adjective you use. And then as they're reading with their pink highlighter, they say, this did not make me feel very confident. And with their green one, I think is maybe the right one, green and pink. With the green one, it's this made me feel really confident. And you actually then do that with 5 people, and you've got some really tangible information about how the content is making people feel, which is super important because it's the lifeblood of the customer experience.
Yes. No, I love that. And having, instead of us trying to go through the content and be like, is this right? And trying to do the evaluation, have our customers do it. Give it directly to them. How does this make you feel? Does this, what do you want to do with this content? I love that.
Yes. Talk to the people.
That's excellent. So when developing all of this content, like let's say we go through and we do the big evaluation, all that kind of good stuff, it takes a ton of time and resources. I mean, from start to finish, I'm looking at, what, 6 months to a year, if not more, sometimes for really big, robust websites. So, and a lot of folks in higher ed often have to get kind of creative when it comes to stretching their time and resources in order to get projects done. So what are some of the ways that we can effectively estimate the time and the resources needed to develop really good content and organize it correctly and all that kind of good stuff?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is if you go back to what I said earlier about providing the content that people actually want, my guess is that you've cut down what you need to create by about half, because you're probably providing a lot of stuff that nobody cares about. And then, so part of that is just really prioritizing what's most important. So then I would also spend some time thinking about, of the content on our website, which is the stuff that people really need. And it might, like, if a priority for the website is to help people choose their degree program, which it may or may not be, but let's just say that, then you need to spend a lot of time on that content and making sure that that's really great. But then as far as kind of figuring out how to get that work done, one of the most important things you can do is just be really realistic about the time that people have on your teams. What happens a lot is we think like, oh, 2 months is plenty of time because we have Amy who can write this content. But when we really look at it and we look at what time Amy has 6 hours a week that she could dedicate to this. So that's like, let's say she can write 2 pages a month based on that, and you've got 100 pages that need to be done in 2 months. That's not going to work. So one of the most important things is just to be really honest and realistic about the time that you have available. And then also the time it takes to include stakeholders and subject matter experts and faculty in those reviews. I think, and that's why it's so important to prioritize, because then you can do that in batches. You can say, in July, we're going to focus on dining center content, for lack of but you can sort of plan that out a little bit better based on your priorities.
I love that. I think that's such a good point. So when it comes to developing the content, what's kind of a good rule of thumb of like how long should it take to write a page or a paragraph, or like where do we even start to estimate that stuff?
Sure. Well, I can tell you how we do it for clients. It's sort of a it's not really terribly scientific, but we estimate on average that if we're writing, let's say something that's 250 words from scratch with not a whole lot to go on, so maybe we need to interview a subject matter expert. We say it's going to take about 3 hours to write that content, and maybe 1 round of revisions is included in that. But that doesn't include review time by the other people. So that's just for the writer. There was one time where I was doing an estimate based on the review time that it was going to take, because higher ed this was actually, I think, for a higher ed client. Higher ed had a lot of people who needed to review this content. So by the time it was all said and done, to figure out how long this would take, it was like 10 hours per page with all of the people's time that was involved. So it was 10 hours per page by 100 pages is, and then divide that by hours and then divide that by weeks and months. And, you're ending up with a lot of time. But as for the actual creation, I would say 3 hours per page for something brand new, and maybe an hour and a half for something that's going to be edited from existing content is probably a good at least place to start. But then there's so many other factors you need to consider, like, is there source content? All of those other things.
And that's such a good point, that you have to have reviews on things, because oftentimes those of us in marketing communications are not the expert on the content, so we can help develop it and make sure that it's geared towards the audiences and it's easier to read and all that kind of good stuff. And out of curiosity, I've read in the past, and this is one of the things we had at the University of Michigan with the health system, is that you had to create content at like a 2nd or 3rd grade level. So that way it's accessible for everybody. They can read it. Is that correct for all content, or is that just more towards, medical terms because it can get too confusing? Or is it good that we keep it simple? Because I mean, it's very hard to tell folks in academia you need to write at a 2nd grade level, and they're like, oh, but our students are really smart. Well, they are, but they want to read it quickly because it's web content. Or what levels should we be writing at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say there is a little bit of it depends there. I agree with the faculty that yes, people are smart, but the other thing to think about with higher ed is not everybody has English as their first language.
Yeah.
So you really need to write it in a way that somebody who might be super smart but speaks Indian can understand and easily grasp. The other thing is that, and I might ask this back to the faculty and just say, when you're reading something, would you prefer to have a bunch of jargon and terminology that's just sort of is a load on your brain, even if you understand it, or would you prefer something that's really easy to read? And a lot of times they're like, oh yeah, I guess I'd prefer easy to read. But it's hard to write easy to read content. It's really hard. It takes a lot of time. And that's why I think it's really great sometimes if you have the budget to have like the faculty being subject matter experts and then somebody who's really good at writing for that lower kind of common denominator, actually interviewing them and then writing the content. Not everybody has that luxury, I get that. So you do what you can. But yeah, I would keep it pretty low. I mean, I'd probably, there's a thing that you can run your content through. I can't remember the name of it now. That sort of tells you, at what grade level you are. I'd keep it. I don't think I'd go much above 6 or 7 from a grade level perspective most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, there was one of the ladies that I worked with, and she's like, if I can't explain it to my 7-year-old, then it's way too complicated, and it shouldn't be that complicated for web stuff. It's not meant to be like an academic publication. It's meant to be,
right. Yeah.
Get stuff done.
Yep. And even when it is for like, say, an academic journal, even then I'd say simplify it more than you already do. I mean, I think you can get away with a lot more because the people who are reading it are for sure, academics, but students doing research read those things, I would say everybody can simplify their writing more than they already do, including myself.
Oh, most certainly. So, all right, so the next fun question that we have. All right, so once we get everyone on board and all of our stakeholders set, and one of the points I don't want to spend too much time on, because I could talk to you about this for days. Over in your book, how to get the stakeholders and different folks you consider and all of that. So once we get them all together, what are the different types of workshops and working sessions that we should consider? So there is I was just talking with someone about today, there's ribbons that you can get that said, I survived another meeting that should have been an email.
Oh, right. Yes. Yes. Oh, gosh.
We're also, we complain about too many meetings and we're going so over. So how can we make sure that we're staying productive when we're getting all of our stakeholders together and talking about, our goals and all those kind of good things?
Sure. So one thing I will say is, a content strategy digital colleague of mine, Kevin Hoffman, he's actually speaking at Compab Higher Ed, but he does a great workshop and talk on making meetings more productive and effective. So one, I would say just try to find anything that he's done on SlideShare on that topic, because I think it would be really helpful. But the other thing two things. One is, I think, the more you can get people aligned on sort of the purpose of your content, what it's going to do, who it's for, what the objectives are, before you start writing, the better that process goes, so you don't need so many meetings. So that's one thing. I think if you can say, okay, we've already aligned on the objectives, this is what it needs to cover, and you can do that in a working session or a document that we call page outlines or page tables, and just sort of get people to agree ahead of time. That can help with fewer meetings. The other thing is, yes, be really cognizant of what can happen outside of a meeting. At Brain Traffic, we use a cool tool called Slack, which is, so basically we have different channels in there, and we can have, real-time conversations, assuming people are available. Just be like, hey, I just wrote this opening paragraph to this thing. Does that make sense? And so kind of, it's basically like chat, but organized and with channels. It's super cool. I love it. And then, yeah, I would say when you do have those meetings, when you have to have meetings and working sessions, the right people need to be there. So if you get to a meeting and the head of the department isn't there and hasn't delegated anyone to actually represent their viewpoint, cancel that meeting if they're a key person who needs to be there, because you're going to end up having that meeting again.
No, you're exactly right. And there was one group of folks that I worked with in the past where if you did not have an agenda and not all the stakeholders there, you couldn't have the meeting. So these leaders
Yeah.
that have meetings started canceling.
Yep. And I've said that to clients before, like, sorry, you guys, but I'm not comfortable moving forward without this person's viewpoint. So we got to reschedule.
I love that. We do have a great question coming
Okay.
from Erin Narlach. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. So do you have any preferred services for translation, keeping the voice and making it for the native speaker audience?
I do not know of any specific services that are better than others. What I would say is that translation is much more than just translation. You really need to think about the local meaning of content. So two ways that you can do that. The first is to just be really, really clear and simple in your English version of the content. So no idioms that don't make sense anywhere else because they're not going to translate, those sorts of things. And there are so many times that I don't realize that I'm using an idiom that doesn't make sense somewhere else. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that the term rise and shine means nothing in any other part of the world. And I was like, oh, well, that seems pretty obvious, but no, it's not to other people. So one, you really need to make sure that your English starting point is clean and simple. And then making sure that you're having somebody, not even just who speaks the language. So let's say I'm not, but let's just say I was a really fluent Spanish speaker and I could easily review what you translated and say, yes, it translates fine. But if I'm not local to the country, there's so many things I might not understand. So I guess the short answer is one, don't rely only on a service unless they can guarantee that they know about cultural things. And then, yeah, just also make sure that you're really thinking about localization and also thinking about what you really need to do is transcreation. Like, do people in, I keep saying India, I don't know why. Do people in India care about different things related to choosing their college than people in the United States do? And if the answer is yes, then you need to transcreate that content, which means create different content for that audience in their language.
That's a really good point. And I like that you brought up keeping it as simple as possible, because when I was working at Disney, speaking of Spanish, the words that you use in Spanish can potentially be very different if you're from Venezuela versus from
Right.
Mexico versus from Puerto Rico. And it was fun to listen to my Spanish speaking colleagues say, what did you just say? I cannot understand your Spanish at all right now. So when it comes to any of the language, keeping it as simple as possible and getting directly to the point and making sure that it's valuable. I think that's
right. Yeah, I learned that in Spain last year, that because I was actually in Catalonia, which has very different terminology than they do in the rest of Spain. So, yeah.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and one of the things that that I've used in the past, just throwing this out there for Erin, is I've asked some of our students who speak different languages, hey, can you help me and just look over this? And it gives them something to throw on their resume that they were able to help kind of do that. And if you're translating your content into a language that you think is going to be necessary for your audience, so for example, if you're translating it into Cantonese or Mandarin because you have a large population, that probably means you have a whole bunch of students around you that can help making sure that you're putting the right things down.
So, and then you can do user research at the same time and user testing. Love it.
Two birds, one stone.
Exactly.
So back with some of the stakeholders, how can we make sure that, like, overall, when it comes to all of our content, how can we make sure that our business goals and our user needs are always kept at the forefront and that our new content is developed correctly? Because it seems like, I don't know if you've had this, I end up going down these rabbit holes, again, another idiom that no one will know, but going down like these rabbit holes of like, oh, it's really important that we develop all this blog content about the color green, when in reality, no one really cares about that right now. They're more worried about, the call to action. So what are some things to make sure that it stays at the forefront?
Yeah, so the main way that I tend to do that with clients is, one, just to get all the stakeholders involved. Don't leave anybody out. especially don't leave anybody out that you think you're going to have trouble aligning with, because if you need to align with them sooner, there is a tool in the book, or there's a workshop plan in the book that helps to do like an objective alignment session where you kind of look at what are the business goals, what are the content needs from a user perspective, trying to understand the users, that you can then validate sort of what you understand with actual user research later on. But so I like to just bring people together to do these things and get aligned. And it's really important to have them hear from each other what their priorities are, so that everybody kind of, one, can empathize with where everybody else is coming from, but also then together agree the path to move forward. So I have had situations where somebody might come to this objective alignment session meeting saying like, well, we really have to provide all of this content for this market segment. And then we go through all of the activities and try to understand the user. And by the end of it, that person's saying, you know what, my market segment isn't going to come to the website. They're more high touch. They're going to actually pick up the phone, or they have this is a financial services client I'm thinking of. They have an advisor and they're always going to call their advisor. They're not even going to come to our site. So they're not the priority. And you just have to sort of let people figure some of that stuff out on their own with you as a facilitator, and then document it so that everybody kind of is like, this is what you said, this is what we agreed to, and you can keep going back to it. And then if it changes, you can continue to change and evolve it, but you've got something from a point of time that says, this is what we said we were going to do and what we cared about right now.
Yeah, and some of the goals that if we started first with like the content audit and content assessment of quality, and we use some of those analytics that you talked about of, people only spend this much time on our website or this many pages. So maybe there's a incredibly important page, but they only spend 30 seconds on it. We need to trim that all that extra fluff that's in there and get directly to the point, because we only have 30 seconds to capture those folks. Or this is the age demographic of folks that are actually looking at content. We are intending it for alumni, but really it's incoming freshmen that are looking at it. So I love that. And then kind of using that to kind of form the goals and saying like, let's go back to what the numbers say to kind of like back up where the goals need to be going forward. And like you said, document.
Document it. Put it in writing and make sure people have it, and remind them when they start going astray.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. We also have a great question from Kevin Renton on the content strategy discussion. So what do you use for inbound or automation or tracking engagement?
So I will say that at Brain Traffic, we are not terribly involved with that aspect. So that is a really great question. I am not really the person to answer it. My clients probably have some really great ideas of what to use, but we more sort of help them figure out what they should be tracking and measuring, what the KPIs should be, but we don't typically get involved with figuring out how to do that from a technology perspective.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point.
Sorry, Kevin.
Sounds like another good show that should be coming up.
Yes, I think you should do that.
So once we get everything on board and all the project management stuff, we get all the stakeholders on board, we have very clear goals, we have very clear KPIs that we're trying to achieve, all of our different standards. Do you have any tips or tools that we should use to effectively execute the whole big content project?
Sure. I don't know that I necessarily have like tools. Tools can be as easy as Google spreadsheets and email, so I won't spend a ton of time there, but there are a couple tips that I think are really important. One is to make sure that everybody you've involved in the project understands what is expected of them and why they are important. So they really see the role that they play and how important that role is and how it affects things up and downstream from kind of where they get involved. I think that's one of the most important things. The other is just like a spreadsheet can work wonders for like, okay, faculty member or department head, this is the content on the site that you own. This is when it needs to be updated. These are the subject matter experts that we need to talk to. Here's, the maintenance schedule we think is necessary for this content. So just something that gives people visibility into what they're responsible for. And then the other thing that I would say is probably one of the most important things is there are so many people in organizations, and I'm guessing higher ed is no exception, that have an expectation on them to help with content, but it is not in their job description. It's just something that we ask them to do extra on top of everything else they're supposed to do. And if it's not in their job description, why would they prioritize it? So you really got to take a look at, if we have an expectation of a department head to be an owner of a chunk of content, that needs to be part of their job. It can't just be a like, hey, we need you to spend 10 extra hours a month on this that we know that you don't have. And it's not going to happen. So it needs to be prioritized. It needs to be, again, documented as an important thing.
I like your idea of the spreadsheets. I even found a Google form, a Google spreadsheet online. There's like different ones you can download that was a Gantt chart.
Yep.
If you take more than a week to get back to me, that's cool, but you're literally pushing back everything else on the project.
Right. Oh, I just thought of a really great tool. There's a newer tool called Gather Content.
Yes.
And it's basically like and I haven't gotten to use it on a project yet because a lot of my clients are still very word-based. Like we provide copy decks when we write copy. And some have us work directly in the CMS, but Gather Content is kind of an in-between where you can set up your page templates within this tool. You can write the content right inside it. It gives you can set up the specifications. So you can say, for this copy chunk, we need to hit on the top 3 reasons somebody might choose to major in psychology or whatever it might be. And then you can also set up a workflow within there. So you can say, after I write this draft, Amy needs to review it. And it tells Amy she needs to review it. And then she can put in her comments. And so it's like a workflow tool that's pre-CMS. But most of the good CMSs can pull from Gather Content. So you don't have to enter it twice as long as you've got the content structured in a similar way. So that's a really cool tool that I'm looking forward to trying on an upcoming project.
Yeah, and I've used it a couple of times, and it is awesome. I totally back you up on it. You can even assign it to certain people, and like it gives them alerts of like, this is
right
on this date, otherwise it's not gonna be able to go in. And you can see there's like little bars of like, here's how much of this content is approved, and here's when it's ready to go, and
sure
up with the website. I love it.
They're great. The guys at Gather Content are great. And I will also just promote their blog. They have some of the best blog content on content strategy I have ever seen.
Awesome. Very cool.
So yeah.
So we talked a lot about our customer needs and that we need to focus in on them. So how can we make sure that we're focusing on their needs and their experiences throughout the entire process? We're very lucky to have our primary customers around us all the time, our students, but should we let them be involved in the development of the content, or how involved should we let them be? Should we help them decide the navigation, or just kind of review it afterwards so that way we can keep our stuff at higher priorities? Like, where do we go?
Sure. That's a really great question. And I think there's 2 things to think about. There's customer research, so user research, which is really thinking about learning as much as you can about how people behave in the wild. A book I would recommend on the topic of user research is Erica Hall's Just Enough Research. It's a really, really, really good, simple, easy to navigate book about like how you get, just enough information. Because you don't have to do every single user research thing possible. But the great thing about higher ed is your target audience is very close to you at all times. So you can do more. You can do user research by sitting on a bench out in the common area and watching what people do. Like, oh, they're always on their phones between classes. You're hearing discussions. You're kind of figuring out, like, there's so much you can do because your audience is right there. At least one of your very primary audiences, at least, is right there. So first, there's just understanding the people and how they behave. I would say stay away from surveys for the most part, because surveys tell you what people say they think or what they say they do, but it doesn't tell you what they actually do. So the example Erica gives, that if you do a survey and you say, how many times per week do you work out? People will be like 4 to 5. But if you really found out like what they actually did, they're sitting on the couch eating ice cream. So we really just thinking about, and I'm one of those people.
Me too.
I do both actually, but not lately, I haven't. So really thinking like, how do people behave in the world outside of anything to do with your content sometimes, just so you can understand. And then I would say, as much as possible, involve them in things like how you organize the content, how you label the content, how you write the content. Do user testing whenever you can. Sometimes you can do it a couple of ways. You can say, we learned all this about the user, we're really confident, we're going to launch, and then we're going to test. Or you can say, we've learned all this about the user, or we haven't, we're going to test, and then we're going to launch. But you're going to do that in succession multiple times over the course of your website. Test, launch, or launch, test, or you should. What came first, chicken or the egg? As much as possible is my answer.
And I love your example about exercising, because I think about it, I'm like, I totally exercise like a couple times a day, and I totally walk this many miles a day. And then I got one of these stupid Fitbits, and I realized, like, wow, I'm a bum.
Don't beat yourself up, Amy.
I need to get involved with the SA Fit group,
Yes.
We have along with this, we have a really good question from Sarah Jane on Twitter. So do you have any worries about multiple contributors to web content voice? And do you have any tips on developing style guides and making sure that it's somewhat consistent?
Yeah, so Amy and I were talking a little bit about this just before we started the session, that you kind of have to decide what type of model you want to have for governance and standards for your website. So I kind of look at it as a quadrant. And on one side of the quadrant, you've got a decentralized model where everybody gets to do their own thing with their content. And the other side, you've got a centralized model where a central group owns all of the content. And then with that, on the top and the bottom, you've got a very prescriptive approach versus a very just like, we'll kind of give you some guidelines, but you're on your own approach. And you kind of got to figure out where you fit in that quadrant from a philosophical perspective. And then from there, you can figure out what kinds of tools and guidelines you need to support kind of whatever approach you're going with. But yes, style guides are amazing. MailChimp just published their style guide online, and then they've also got their voice and tone guide. Take a look at it. They say anybody can just use it. So you can take it and then adapt it and make it your own. It's really great. I wish I remembered the URL right now. So yeah, style guides, very, very important. Helping people understand web writing best practices is super important, especially for people who, let's say you have a decentralized approach, and people who don't write for the web for a living, like a lot of you do, they don't know any better. They're trying to do the best they can, but they do not know any better. So give them some tips and tools, show them examples of what's okay and what isn't. I think that's one of the best ways to learn, is to like take some content that somebody wrote, and you don't have to be mean about it, but just be like, you wrote this is how I rewrote it, here are the differences. So some good and bad examples of what you mean when you say we have a friendly voice, like what does that mean? What does that look like? I think the more you can demonstrate, the better in all of those cases. We do a lot of web writing trainings with people. I've done some great activities where I have groups of people work together, and they'll each take a page of the site to start from, and they'll each write like an outline for the page. And then they'll trade that outline with the other person, and then the person will try to write the content based on the outline. And then they trade it back and edit it, and just sort of see like, are we giving people enough good guidance so that they understand what's expected and what it means to be on strategy and what it means to write for our voice and tone.
That's excellent. So it's almost like painting a picture together, but doing
it. There is a really good blog post. I should have thought about some of this stuff ahead of time about like resources, but there's a really good blog post about writing in pairs. And I think if you just searched for writing in pairs, you'd probably find it. But it kind of talks about like that kind of hands-on approach to doing that. The other thing that I would recommend, not so much for writing, although it's helpful for writing, is something called the core model that was developed by a guy called R.A. Oh gosh, I can't say Ari's last name. It's like he can barely say his last name. It's so difficult to pronounce. But he's from NetLife Research in Norway. And it's in the book, actually. I talk about the core model in the book, but it's this really great way to first prioritize the pages on your site that are the most important, but then also figure out the context for the pages. What are we trying to achieve? What are the users trying to achieve? How do people get to this page? What do they do after this page? And it helps you sort of outline what should be on the page based on those things. It's really cool. It's awesome.
And we did, so if anyone's following us on Twitter, Ann Haynes just tweeted out the MailChimp style guide.
Oh, thank you, Ann.
So thank you, Ann. That's awesome. So we're getting close to the very end, and one of the most important things, and I don't want to spend, because I know you're doing a presentation, I think, coming up on website governance.
I am.
So I don't want to, I know you could probably go into this super in depth, but this is one of the things that I find so challenging is, you know, do you have any recommendations or like little tips that we could kind of take away with that'll, you know, help build our appetite for your great presentation that's coming up?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you one of the activities that I'm planning on doing that is half baked in my brain right now. But there's like this idea of there's roles and responsibilities, and that roles do not necessarily have to be a staff person, but it's like the responsibilities of those roles need to be filled by somebody. So one of the things that I want to talk about in this session is I'm going to have little strips of paper with different responsibilities on them, and I'm going to have people make their own cards of who they have that works on content, and then figure out where do these responsibilities fit with those people, and if they don't currently fit anywhere, where are we going to make them fit, because they have to be accounted for somewhere. So that's one thing that I think will be an interesting exercise for people to figure out, like where they're missing responsibilities getting met. The other thing is just really thinking through what it means to have a person with authority, a person or a team, a person usually, that really has the authority to say, this is what we aligned on our content strategy. I'm sorry, you know, president of the school, we're not doing this. And that's tough, but we actually need somebody who can say no to the president. And that if they come up with something that's, yeah, exactly. I don't want that job. But you need someone with that kind of authority to be able to say, we agreed, you were part of this to this strategy, and this isn't a good idea. And they need to be able to say yes too, if it makes sense. But so thinking through sort of how do you get that kind of authority into your organization? I don't know how I'm going to do that yet in a workshop, so stay tuned for that. But I'm thinking about those things, and I would love actually if people want to, if whether you're going to Confab or not, you know, tweet out like the kinds of things that you'd be really curious to learn in a governance workshop, because that might help me focus what the people want versus what I want to tell them.
Well, and with what you're saying, just throwing ideas out there, one of the universities I worked at, they had a higher up, like one of the directors or VPs or whatever, was a sponsor of a project. And so if you're like, this is the way that we're going with this, they sponsor that and they back that up based on what the committee. So that person doesn't have to be involved in every single meeting. They don't have to, but if this is what we say our goals are and that we're not going to be building additional content about, you know, something that's not relevant, then now you can have that director or VP be like, yeah, this is the direction we're going in, and I support my team.
Yep.
So
Agree. Executive ownership and sponsorship of these kinds of projects is super important.
Yeah. And if you don't have that support, regardless of whether it's about content or any type of objective, if you don't have that higher up support, you're not going to be able to do what you need to do and succeed.
Yep. And content strategy in a lot of ways is really about just saying no to things that don't make sense. And so
out of curiosity, so we just launched our new website, and we have, and one of the things that we had in the past is, and I've seen this done at different universities, where you have almost like a system of approval, right? So you have someone who like can go in and edit the content and say like, okay, the date needs to be changed, so I changed the date. And then you have someone who has to review it and then approve it for it to go on. But then you start to get things that are like backed up. So what we started to do is we said, all right, certain people are owners of certain pages.
Yes.
And whatever you put on there automatically goes live. You know, is that playing with fire? I mean, it's worked pretty well, knock on wood, so far for like the 3 months that we've had our site live. But is this playing with fire? Is it something where we should, you know, they can't create new pages, they can't, you know, delete pages, but they can edit all the content on there? Like, should we allow them to do that automatically, or?
Maybe. I think it sounds like it is working fairly well. And so I think for that to be successful, sort of thinking about that kind of prescriptive versus guidelines and, centralized versus decentralized sort of model, you have to kind of figure out a little bit about like the risks you're willing to take. So maybe there is a core set of pages on certain things that are just like, I am the only person who can push these pages live. They are so important, and the risks to them being wrong or off brand or off strategy are so great that we just can't. But then I think there probably are some things like, oh, we're having this event and then we change the date. Well, yeah, let them go change the date to what it's supposed to be instead of waiting 5 days until the event's over because it's backed up in the system. So I think you just really have to be smart about what kinds of things can be super decentralized and what things can't. And then also, maybe just having an alert. So anytime a page gets updated, there's a content manager person or, someone responsible for that who can at least just be like, oh, okay, somebody updated that event page. I'm just going to make sure it's formatted correctly, or, whatever the case may be. So I think you just have to be smart about how you do it.
I love that. That's some really great tips. Well, we are getting very close to the very end, and so many people are giving some great tweets on Twitter and putting out different, it looks like they're even posting out the article that you were talking about the core model and designing.
Oh, great. Yay. Yes.
Make sure, I'm gonna have to go back and check on that on Twitter.
You guys are the best. I didn't have to do any pre-work. You just found it all for me.
Our audience is on top of it. So,
yes.
So to wrap up, what would you say is the absolute most important thing that we should all consider when developing content?
The most important thing, I would say the most important thing to consider is getting your foundation figured out, your business goals, your user needs, the most important channels and touch points figured out, shored up, done well before jumping at the next big idea. So before you start saying, and this is a bad because it's an old example, but before you say, oh my God, we need to have Vine, we need to have everything on Vine, we need to have all these Vine videos, like, does your website contain your contact information in a way people could, like making sure the really important stuff is figured out before you try to enhance with stuff that's sort of like, oh, that might be cool, but isn't necessary. And I think I don't know if it's everywhere. I know it's an American thing that we are just so hungry for the bright, shiny thing that somebody heard about and wants to do that we forget to like just do the very basic things well. So that's what I'd say.
No, I love that. It's like when you go to a restaurant, yeah, you can get super fancy dinner, but sometimes just a really good hamburger is, the way to go. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Megan, for joining us.
Thank you.
You are absolutely brilliant, and I seriously want to encourage everyone to go buy her book. It is so good. There's so many tips. I've read it twice now, and I'm going through and I'm like, oh, I need to get this tool, and oh, here are different things I can do to make my life easier. So go check it out. I know for a fact you can get on Amazon. I'm sure there's a bunch of other places you can get it. So thank you again. This is awesome.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to reading all of the tweets when I get off of here.
I know, they look really good. So thank you everyone for joining us today. As always, you can check out more shows from Higher Ed Pros on higheredlive.com. Thanks, and see you next time.
Bye.